I'm Bill Auten of Auten Claims Management.
I'm Chantal Roberts of CMR Consulting, and welcome to the Art of Adjusting podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about life as an insurance adjuster from the perspective of property, auto, liability, or workers' compensation adjusters. Our goal is to bring interesting topics in the world of claims adjusting to people who are working as an adjuster now and to people who are considering a career as a claims adjuster.
All right. Hey, Chantal, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. I've been better. I got a little bit of a cold here, but I think I'll
Mm,
survive. So if I sound a little wheezy, that's why.
that's okay. We hope you feel better. We hope you
Me
feel
too.
better.
Me too.
Yeah, so I am super excited to introduce David Princeton, who is a CPCU, an AMIM, an Associate in Marine Insurance Management, AIC, CSRP, a Certified Subrogation Recovery Professional. He's the principal consultant for Advocate Risk Network, Inc., which provides policyholders, brokers, and attorneys with dedicated claim professional services to develop a comprehensive claim presentation strategy. Now, on a personal note, David and I follow each other on LinkedIn. And Bill, you've met David previously when you and I used to do Clubhouse.
So we had him on for an interview. Yep, I remember.
Yep. This is where I first met David, and I, like other quote unquote staff adjusters, would of course call him like a quote unquote public adjuster. And he was kind enough to talk to one of my risk management classes one time. And David, I would love to get you to come back too, by the way, um, to give the other side of the coin to get, because I believe it's really important to do that, cross the aisle kind of conversation and learn from the other side. And that's kind of what I want to do today. And so actually there's quite a few things that David talks about, both in LinkedIn and here, that I agree with, and I know you do as well, Bill. So, David, welcome. We love to have you here.
Well, thank you, Chantel, and thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm a fan of the art of the adjusting. Got the book over on my shelf.
Oh, thank
So
you.
and it was a pleasure to talk to those students of yours. So gosh, I think that goes back about a year ago now. So
At
it's been a
least,
minute.
at
Yeah.
least, yeah, yeah. And the thing is that I try to present when I'm teaching the students when we're talking about claims. I try to tell them, okay, I'm going to talk about public adjusters and I'm going to try to be good, but I just,
Oh,
there's literally two in my 25 years of doing insurance that I have met that I have felt were, what's a good word? Okay. And you're one of them. And I remember you telling the students that you did not like the term public adjuster. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah. So the term public adjuster, the same way you kind of cringed up,
Hmm.
right? It carries a bit of a stigma with it. And I think that stigma comes from the fact that I grew up on the carrier side, right? And carriers, I think, do a really good job of helping people shape and understand a vision, a way to think and see things. The challenge that I kind of give myself is I try to be the change that I want to see in the world, right? And so, maintaining high ethical standards, right? Open and honest communication, presenting things in a way that is reasonable to what the policy promise is. And then I expect the same from the other side, right? The fun side or fun thing to me is, we talked about sides a little bit, right? I actually just view it as there's a promise to be fulfilled. There really shouldn't be sides to it. And where I see sides get developed is when all of these other interests get conflated in, right? And as people start to get concerned about cost containment, timeliness of payments, ability to recover following a loss, right? Even in the liability side of things, right? Duty to defend. There's a lot that's happening in this world of insurance, and I kind of put that catalyst as COVID, right? Insurance carriers put about 46.8 billion last time I paid attention to it, into the defense of COVID, right?
Mm.
They didn't put it into indemnity and payments. They put it into defense categories. So you saw a huge groundswell of regulations and change and all this different attention. And I think it's paying off for them, right? Travelers just announced quarterly profits, net profit of $10.8 billion yesterday.
Why
Yeah.
aren't they sharing it with us, is what I want.
Well,
We're going to have an investigative report next week.
right? Well, and that's, so the little bit of the irony of the investigative report side, right? Um, when you think of profitability and the way balance sheets, like insurance companies are banks that pay claims, right? I think we've all heard that term. And so when you think of the regulatory oversight that's supposed to be looking at the financial viability and everything else, and the way the money moves and spreads, I'm not familiar with that area of it, but I got to imagine just like other people can look at situations and move numbers and move figures to make them look good or bad. I think of a simple analogy. If you're dating, you want to look rich, and if you're divorcing, you want to look poor. It's the same dollar, right? But people's perceptions that they shape around it. So,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
you
yeah,
had mentioned something about sides,
yeah.
and I have this gentleman on LinkedIn who often comments on my posts, and he is always encouraging me to quote get on the right side of insurance. And I said, I question that because I feel like I am, just like you feel like you are, and there are no really sides because our point, whether it's the public adjuster, professional adjuster, staff adjuster, or like Bill, independent adjuster, our job is to pay that covered claim, and our job is to protect and indemnify our insured. So we all are on the same side. We just
Yeah.
go about it differently. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and when I think of like the ways in which I was taught as an adjuster on the carrier side to ask questions, right? And you're asking questions that usually are trying to rule in or out exclusions under the policy, right? And so, but to a policyholder, whether it's a business or a homeowner or any other form of policyholder I can possibly think of, um, they don't understand the reason for the question, right? And usually when you're asking that question, you don't say, well, I'm going to ask you a list of questions, and any affirmative answer is going to result in me denying your claim. Like, right? Like
right.
that's not how you open the cadence of the conversation, right? Where did the water come from, right?
Hmm.
How did the person come to fall on your property? You just start kind of going into these things as part of the investigation to document the loss, right? Um, but this idea of public adjusters or independent adjusters and staff adjusters, it's interesting when you start thinking of principles of agency, right? And so, and for, principles of agency are things like where as a public adjuster, I can become an agent of my policyholder, right? Or of the insured because I represent their interests. Some states that means I have a fiduciary responsibility, other states I don't. When you think of an insurance company, when they actually contract with like a bill, right, an independent adjuster, Bill's loyalty is to his customer, the carrier, right? Not to the policyholder. And so when you think of putting that distance in between and the ramifications it can have on, and Bill, I'll pick on you because you're here, right? On,
We always pick
Bill's
on Bill.
right, and Bill's conduct in the course of that claim, right? And it becomes a question, can it be impugned back against the carrier? Well, I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes piece, a couple weeks ago, I think now, but that was an example of somebody like Bill going out, writing a scope, writing an estimate, coming up with what they thought the damages were, and then ultimately putting that back through their employer, who was an agent, an independent adjuster agency of the carrier. And then, mayhem ensued, right? 300,000 became 15,000, and then years of litigation and everything else. Um, the fact that that is happening, right? And the fact that now that 60 Minutes piece, Heritage's stock tanked that Monday morning, right? The financial consequences of that. You have change now with Milton claims, I believe, in Florida. I'm not licensed in Florida. I just like to go there on vacation, right? So I don't work in Florida, but when you see these things, like those are great things, right? Because there should be transparency behind the process. There should be the correct names on who's making adjustments and why, right? Especially if internally, right? Because that's an internal dialogue that happened there that had drastic consequences on the policyholder. Um, those things should be disclosed. Those things should be talked about. They shouldn't be behind closed doors, right? Maybe I'm too much of a true believer, but I think looking at all of us, right, Bill and I included here, so in this tribe, like I think we're all of an age where we came through this industry at a time where it was truly there to help people,
Yeah.
right? Like you looked for coverage.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now I see the term direct, right? Are you
Hmm.
guys familiar with the term direct in an insurance policy
Well, I
insuring
know
a
about
person?
direct physical damage.
Yeah,
Direct physical
direct physical
loss. Yeah.
damage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
Well, we get into and Bill, since we've picked on you, I'm gonna open the door to you so that you can defend yourself. But I
Sure.
think with direct,
All independent adjusters everywhere, Bill.
yeah, every single one of you, because I was an independent third party administrator. Now I didn't go out and write estimates, but I did hire people like Bill. And in fact, Bill and I swear we had a working relationship before we met again on LinkedIn. But Bill, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and then we can get into what the direct physical loss is.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, direct physical loss from my perspective, the best way it's been explained to me is in the case of a siding loss, vinyl siding. So you've got vinyl siding on one side of the house that was damaged, and it doesn't match the rest of the house. Direct physical loss means the panels that were directly damaged, you owe to replace those. The ones that were undamaged don't need to be replaced because they're not damaged. They did not sustain direct physical loss. So that's the best analogy that I can come up with. There's arguments. I just saw something recently about a court decision, and my mind is foggy this week, so I can't remember specifically where it was. But I think it had to do with roof tiles and a matching issue. And the court kind of nailed down the direct physical loss, saying that the undamaged shingles do not need to be replaced under the policy. So that's what direct physical loss means to me, anyway.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we talk about that, because I think it does deal with our consequential, I suppose, losses and our direct physical losses. So I think we can all agree that our direct physical losses is the damage that has actually happened. But I actually attended a seminar on physical or matching systems, and Florida does have a law on, like, if 25% of the roof is damaged, then you would have to replace that side or whatever. But I think, too, to David's point, is that we get into this issue, and this may be semantics, where staff adjusters feel that public adjusters or policyholder adjusters would inflate an estimate. And what you were talking about with 60 minutes, David, is a very good point, because I happen to believe the transparency, and I talk about that a lot, and I post about it a lot. And one of the things that I said was, you know what, the guy who still wrote the estimates, and his quote was, because there is damage. I wrote it down because there is damage. They told me not to. I still did it, and I got fired. And I'm like, you know what? There's not a lot of people who can do that, because if there's damage, period. We can't invent or ignore damage. Whether it's covered or not is different, and you can have different estimates. And I would often ask my IAs, look, if there's non-covered damage, write two estimates, because the insured doesn't understand coverage, period. But they don't know. And so when we as staff adjusters get an estimate, we may feel that it's inflated. And so that's not necessarily correct, though, is it, David?
Yeah, so going to touch on a few points, and I'll come back to the inflationary piece, right, or
Hmm.
the inflated estimate part. But so the bill's description of sort of that siding, that's actually the narrow view of what direct means. And there's more time in this country where direct meant all of these other ensuing things around that siding, in terms of just keeping with Bill's analogy, as being applicable, right? But then you saw it get kind of narrowed down and honed through case law, but that's why you have 50 different versions of what happens in that loss, right? Depending on where you plop it on this great country of ours. Um, so that's one aspect. Two, Chantel, you just mentioned it. Policyholders don't know their coverage, right? And that's why there's this huge responsibility when you look at Unfair Claims Practices Acts, right? And every state's got them. And what's the one thing that an adjuster can't do? And that's uniform across all of them, at least everyone I've ever read, right? Misrepresent the coverage, right? And you are making a very good point, which is there's damage over here or loss, right? And then there's coverage over here, right? So not all losses are covered. But when an adjuster goes out there, at least this is the way I approach things, I'm there to document all of the loss. Whether or not it is covered is a second question, right? But if I don't document it, I can't explain it. I can't put a narrative to what my thoughts are about what brought this about, right? And I think of like auto claims. I think auto claims does a really good job with UPD, right?
Right.
Unrelated prior damage,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
Yes, and even in that auto claim, right? And think of a bumper on a car. Okay, so it got damaged at the grocery store. Nobody did anything about it below deductible, right? Somewhat now they get in a rear end accident, so we'll make it at fault for them. And now that bumper's cracked and it has to be replaced, right? Well, you can write an unrelated prior damage estimate on the bumper, but the fact that your repair is going to remove that bumper and put a new one on, you don't take away, call it the betterment of removing that scratch, right? It's just gone in the ether of things because your covered damages are now going to address that cracked bumper. So they end up in a better situation. This idea of betterment, and this is where I'll kind of dovetail into that idea of inflation, right? Or inflating an estimate. This idea of betterment is what a replacement policy does.
Thank you. Okay. Um, Go ahead and
No,
we'll
no,
talk.
after
No,
you,
we'll
after
talk.
you.
That's what a
No, you
replacement
haven't.
cost. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I often say to my students, and I know I'm probably going to get just, I don't know, crucified over this. Um, but my husband likes to tease me that I'm a plaintiff-oriented adjuster. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I just want the policyholder to get everything that's owed to them, and that is our job. Really, that is our job. Anyway, um, you know, uh, the thought that there is a concept for everybody who does not know. If you're a brand new spanking adjuster and you don't know, there is a concept in insurance that an insured cannot, or even a claimant, the claimant period, a first or third party claimant cannot profit from insurance. We're supposed to put them back to where they were pre-loss, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Given that,
So
the
that's
fact
indemnity. That's indemnity,
that's
right?
indemnity,
That's
but
indemnity.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
given that we have an idea or a concept of replacement cost in our policy, that means that if my 45-inch TV is struck by lightning or damaged by lightning or whatever, and I bought it 10 years ago, and I get a new one, it's going to be better because now it's got all these HDI 4 5G crystals that, I mean, cook dinner for me basically and go grocery shopping
Well, it
and
is Wi-Fi enabled, so it can be
yeah,
on when you're home, like
I
when you get home.
mean, it can do everything for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
And I'm still convinced robots are going to kill us sometime in the future. But
Thank you,
that is an
Elon. Yeah.
yes, that is an upgrade
Yeah.
essentially. And I'm profiting by
Yeah.
it. And does that defeat the idea of indemnity? Sure it does. So can the insured get more out of insurance? Yes, they can. But yeah, anyway, they can
And
profit out of it. That's the
yeah.
whole idea
I,
of recoverable depreciation. But that
I'm going to
doesn't mean
push back a little bit on that, though,
okay,
Chantel.
okay.
And here's why. When you're comparing, and this happens a lot with electronics and tech items, when you're comparing an item that's 5 years old from a current item, the changes are so profound in the thing that it's no longer really the same thing anymore. Um, I would use something a little simpler for your example, like a piece of furniture or something a little more mundane than a piece of high tech. Because let's say you've got a dining room table. Okay, you bought it at a large retailer 5 years ago, and they sell the exact same one today. There's no difference between the one that you bought 5 years ago and the one you bought today, except the only difference is that the one that you've had for 5 years is a little more worn down. That demonstrates the concept of indemnity a little clearer, in that you've used 5 years of that kitchen table, so it's depreciated by whatever amount that is. And let's say yours is worth $300, a new one is worth $800. Pick whatever numbers you want. You're going to get that brand new $800 one because you have replacement costs under your policy. So that's where the betterment comes in. The example of the television having more features than the other one, you're really not comparing apples to apples anymore. Now you're saying chances are that television has more features and costs less than the original one did 5 years ago anyway. So that's where the confusion comes when I hear people talk about especially computers. I mean, when you start talking about laptops and computers, it gets even crazier.
Okay,
Yeah.
first of
It's
all,
inversely disproportional, right? So
yeah,
when you
Yeah,
talk about
yeah.
tech, yeah.
yeah. Okay, first of all, Bill's not fun. Second of all, Second of all,
I'm a
I
lot of
still
fun.
I still say you have profited, and profit is probably not the good word to use because, plaintiff attorneys are going to hear this and go, aha, Chantal said in some deposition that I'm going to have some in the future, oh, you can profit. No, I'm not saying that. It is betterment, because you're not supposed to
Oh,
profit.
Chantel, can I give you a different way to think of that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They received the benefit of their bargain. They got
Well,
the benefits available under the policy.
that's exactly what they
Well,
have.
they should. Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
they paid for.
that's
That's
what they
exactly
paid
what they've
for.
paid for. They paid a
Yeah,
premium for it.
yeah. So
Um,
it's not profit. It's not profit. It's a benefit.
yeah, well, I
It's a
mean,
benefit.
is it really a benefit? Well, I mean, yes, it is a
It
benefit, but
is.
but
Yeah.
the thing is that they paid for it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, it's
They
included in
have
the
paid
premium
for this.
basis.
They
Yeah.
paid a premium for this. They
Yeah.
could have cheaper insurance and it just be ACV.
Correct.
And so anyway,
And
I
Have
I
you
still
guys ever looked at the initial case on replacement cost policies versus ACV when they first came out, like 18, I think it was like 1890 something or 1919, somewhere in there?
oh God, no.
No.
I
So
mean, I'm not
super
that much of an
interesting.
insurance nerd.
Not, oh, okay. All right. All right. All right. Well,
Please,
anyways,
please educate us, David.
well, so it was really interesting. So and I wish I could cite the case. I read it a long time ago, and it was just this is the part that stuck with me, right? Which is when replacement cost policies came out, they sold them for more money. And then, and this is, I think, pre-regulation, like pre-McCarran-Ferguson, all that kind of stuff about integrity and honesty and yada, yada, yada. And then the policyholder had to sue to actually get their benefits because they tried to just recharacterize replacement cost as being ACV.
Oh, wow.
And
Interesting.
and so like it was really interesting, and then the judges reasoned past that, but it's one of those cases that serves as sort of that stepping stone in the lineage of the law development around what is replacement cost? What does direct mean, right? So is direct literal? Is it textualist, right? Scalia is, the Supreme Court justice known for, well, you read what the word is, and that's what the word means, right?
Right,
That's
right.
textualism, as opposed to extrapolating from that the intent of the parties, the understandings, what could this thing mean, right? And so bringing all that back into like the inflation of the estimate, maybe using Bill's example of the siding on the house, which is 50 state different, right? In terms of how it gets treated. Is it a line of sight state, right? Does line of state impact if it's the backyard or the front yard, right? Whether or not you go, another corner or another corner, right? When you think of building codes and how those things impact things. So for example, if you had a house that didn't have like a Tyvek or a moisture barrier on the outside, but now code requires it, so you pull it off of one side. Well, how are you now going to address the corner? When you
Exactly.
have dissimilar materials, right? Aluminum siding discontinued, right? All of your vinyl siding, how do you make those meet up? You start getting into all of these like separations in things. And I think that's where like this impression of inflation or inflating an estimate and that type of thing, um, being able to scope something out, recognize what the issues are, this is a human process. There's a lot of skill involved. Um, to use cars, manufacturers are extremely precise, right? To fix a BMW is to fix a BMW is to fix a BMW, right? And there's literally a time schedule and a book that says this is, Mitchell's, right? This
Right,
is what it
right.
takes. They overanalyze it. My house is what's called a modular home or a Wausau home, right? Got delivered on the back of two flatbeds back in 1976,
Hmm.
right? So when you think of what it takes to build mine, and fortunately it's got the 2x4 walls and all this other kind of stuff, versus a frame built house, right? Versus a CMU house, versus other things, all those unique characteristics is what makes this process that much more difficult. So you take the this idea of the adjuster came out and wrote an estimate. Well, you can't just measure the side of the house and go, well, I'll pay $100 a square and call it a day, right? You have to adjust for all the variables.
You mentioned a good point, and I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so let's talk about this. We do have somewhat of a disconnect where like a field adjuster that is hired by the carrier or the desk adjuster goes out and writes the estimate herself, meets up with you, for example, and we have two very different views. How do we come together and get to that agreed scope of damage? Because really, I often tell adjusters, look, get the insured to figure out who they want, or if they've got a public adjuster, professional adjuster, policyholder adjuster, whoever, however we want to phrase this, um, get them out there because it's going to save time with our supplements. Now, there's always going to be, or not always, but often there's going to be a supplement. But let's curtail this because then we also stop that narrative that the insurance company is lowballing. So if we can get everybody out there on the same day to come to an agreed scope or an agreed estimate or what have you, how can we listen? How can we as desk adjusters, as carrier adjusters, listen to you and your profession and understand where y'all are coming from? I think that's a curveball. I don't
Ooh,
think I told you
ooh,
this
all right.
question before. Spoiler
Yeah,
alert, I usually give questions beforehand if
this
you didn't
is
know that.
this is great, Chantel, because if I could solve this problem, I would be able to stop working and just go on national circuits and tours and train everybody how to do it. But honestly, Chantel, it's moments like these, I think. It's dialogue, it's conversation. People have to be able to communicate, and I think communicate effectively. Um, through these things. If either side has a tough message to deliver, you got to be able to deliver it, right? Not all news is good news.
I have some
But
thoughts on that.
yeah.
I've been a property adjuster for many years. I don't really handle it anymore, but in my experience, what I've found is that there's a spectrum to the level of underwriting or overwriting of estimates. On the low end, you've got company adjusters who are intentionally writing as low an estimate as they can to impress their boss or to whatever, spite someone. I don't know why they do it, but I've seen it. And then you've got staff or company adjusters or even independent adjusters who write an estimate that's too low. And it's just because they didn't understand the full scope. And it may be because they weren't shown certain areas, they didn't know to look for certain areas or whatever. It could be to either incompetence, mild or extreme, or it could be just a simple misunderstanding. And then you've got, if we go to the next level, you got a public adjuster who writes an estimate that's heavy. And it's because maybe they're considering direct physical loss as something different than the company adjuster. Or maybe they're considering damages to certain areas of the home that the carrier didn't think was related to the loss or something like that. And then you got the fourth level of a public adjuster who is writing purposefully inflated estimate to hopefully nudge the claim higher on the negotiation scale. So of those four, so I've presented kind of a spectrum. On one end, you've got bad things going on, and the other thing, you got bad things going on. But then there's this middle ground where there's really just a dialogue that needs to happen. And that's where the public adjuster and the staff adjuster, company, independent, whatever, go to the place and have a conversation, a reasonable conversation. If you can't get things done in that environment, then something nefarious is going on one side or the other. And that's what I found. I've seen public adjuster estimates that were inflated level 4, as I just described. I've seen utility room with 8 furnaces in there in the estimate. I've seen 3 toilets in a bathroom, stupid, obvious things like that.
Government contracting, is that what I'm
hearing? Yeah.
Were they mistakes? Were they errors? Were they just trying to present a number at the outset, and knowing that every public adjuster I've dealt with over my career, we've always been able to manage to come together. We've gone through some appraisals. In my career, I haven't gone through many appraisals. I haven't had to. I don't think it's a good answer to things. But anyway, that's my 2 cents on how these estimates get either inflated or underwritten. That's not a good word. What should I say? What do you call it when thin? Yeah.
Or lowballing. I mean, the derogative term is lowballing.
Yeah, that's the word. So you've got lowball on the one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got highballing, I guess.
Yeah. Let's all have a highball is what I'm saying. Right. Even though it's like 9 a.m. here. So
yeah.
So Bill, what I find really interesting about what you just described is going back to fair claims practices, right? The difference between knowingly doing something, so your first example, or your first and your fourth, right? The adjuster that's knowingly writing something low purposefully, right? So knowingly misrepresenting something versus mistakenly misrepresenting something.
Right.
And that was your second example is, maybe they write a bad estimate because, lack of knowledge, they just don't know any better, things like that. One thing, and I honestly, I wrestle with this concept. I don't know of another industry that can profit from its incompetence. Every dollar an adjuster doesn't know to write for is a dollar of pure profit to the carrier, right? Because if the policyholder doesn't have an advocate on the other side that knows better, or a contractor that's willing to, challenge them for the value of the true scope, right? That level of empowered ignorance, which I think is a lot of the frustration I see in the social media categories, right? Those types of things I think are what are becoming the noise. The people that can agree, and I would put myself in this category. I fly pretty low, like under the radar, right? I'm there. I come in, I do my job. I don't want to say I quite check the boxes, but I just try to move things through as efficiently as possible within the degree of reasonableness, and then just kind of move on to the next claim, the next situation. The difficulty is when you're met with resistance for resistance sake.
Right.
When somebody takes what should be the restoration of a business that's providing the livelihood of people that work for it, right? Or a homeowner who's, that's their life asset. It's probably the largest asset they own, right? And it's being toyed with gamesmanship. That's where I struggle to understand why characterizing something as a game has to kind of come into it,
Yeah.
right? And playing games with people's lives, like literally their lives, right?
And that's why I say, as adjusters, carrier adjusters, let's meet these guys in the middle. Let's meet them when we're doing our inspections. On the flip side, of course, is the bad actors who are the policyholder advocates who play a game. And one of the things that I see is they try to control the narrative by controlling access to the insured. They try to control the narrative by telling the contractor what to do or what not to do. I happen to have read, and I'm under an NDA, so I can't really talk about it, but I read an email where the public adjuster was telling the contractor, don't talk to the carrier adjuster. You're not helping me. And I'm like, oh, um, that's not your job. So because I feel just like what Florida did with their ethics rule,
Mhm.
I'm sure everybody has read that one too, where it said, adjusters have to, what we were talking about earlier, be transparent. If you're going to
Mhm.
change something, put your name on it, put why you're changing it. And everybody got excited until all the public adjusters in Florida realized that they fall under the term, quote, adjuster, end quote, like whether you're public staff,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So there's the bad actors on this side too. And so how would we as carriers call people out on that? I'll tell you what I do, which was if I felt like the professional adjuster, policyholder adjuster, or whoever, I often copy my correspondence and email to the insured so they know what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, you
Yeah,
know,
I include my policyholders on my communications, unless they tell me not to. Oftentimes, I actually recommend that they create a separate email box, like a Gmail or
yeah.
whatever. And then that way, I just always CC it. If they ever want to know what's going on, they control it. It's their copy of the file, and all of my correspondence is in there. That's how much I just believe in that level of transparency, right?
It's open
Some clients choose
communication.
not to. Yeah, some clients choose not to, and that's their choice. But at least, that's my recommendation to them that they do it. Um, Chantel, it's interesting. The idea of ethics in adjusting, right? And because that's really, I think, largely what we've been talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
This idea of ethics. Well, so one of the things, when a policyholder hires a public adjuster, public adjusters and lawyers are, I think, the only two professions that you can stand in front of somebody else and speak on their behalf, right? I'm not aware of
Realtors,
any.
realtors.
Um,
Brokers.
well, you're representing them in a deal, right? But
Yeah.
but I'm thinking like in a potentially
Yeah.
adversarial
Yeah,
type
yeah,
way,
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
right?
Okay. Okay.
Insurance agents represent the company and they're selling
Right.
a product, right? Realtors, ironically enough, they don't represent the buyers. Now that'll all change with the new laws hitting that area, but they both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent both are paid by the seller. So they're
Hmm.
both technically seller's agents, right? When I think of like having the ability to advocate for somebody, right? Like those are the two licenses I know of. Well, when you say like they're shielding the insured, well, that's what they hired them for, right? The same way they would hire a lawyer to shield them from all of this stuff. Deal with this representative, not me.
Hmm.
As far as when you start getting into the spread of things, the contractor and other things, the distinction I would make, I'm not aware of anything called adjuster-client privilege,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
There's attorney-client privilege, but there's not this idea of adjuster-client privilege. All of those communications with the contractor and everything else, This idea of like, you're not helping me, right? Um, uh, I would imagine that everybody's interests, at least on the policyholder side, between a contractor, public adjuster, and everything else, should be aligned.
It sh-
Should, right? But if they're not aligned, you're going to see that. But at the same time, and there's always a degree of like reasonableness in the scope of a repair, right? Like the chuck in a truck example versus, the sophisticated corporation that, has all this other kind of overhead and yada yada yada, right? So so you can always choose your adventure on the quality of the workmanship that you want, but the type of contractor that would work on my house isn't the type of contractor you'd want walking into a Four Seasons, right? Resort. So there's degrees of everything. And I think a lot of it has to do with like recognizing what's right for the property. I tend to use cars because it's a little bit simpler of an analogy, like everybody kind of interacts with them. Um, More so than a home repair, right? Or a home catastrophic loss. But when you think of um, what a mechanic charges to work on, call it every domestic vehicle you see, and then what they're going to charge to work on a McLaren or a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. It's probably the same snap-on wrench going lefty loosey righty tighty, right? But the rates are going to be a little different, right? They don't put somebody on a plane and fly them around the world to do pinstriping on a Chevy, right? They'll
right.
do it on a Bentley or something else, but I'll digress at that point.
Yeah, but you know what? It brings up what you were talking about, ethics, open communication, and I know that public adjusters and regular adjusters, I'm going to call them regular, non-policyholder adjusters, staff adjusters, independents, we have different licenses.
Mhm.
And so do public adjusters, and this is again not a question that I had asked you previously, but do public adjusters have ethical requirements that they have to fulfill like we do as staff adjusters? For example, I do have a Florida license, so I
Mhm.
have to have 4 hours of
Yeah.
ethics to maintain
Yep.
my Florida license. In my home state, I just have to have three, but it's reciprocal.
Yep.
So in that instance, is there ethical requirements that you have to study to
Oh
get your
yeah,
license?
yep, absolutely. So yeah, there's the same standards, right? So my Wisconsin public adjuster license, so it's actually optional here for residents. So I opted in to be held to those standards. I'm also a licensed insurance agent here, property casualty, life and health, right? Licensed to do CE here as a CE instructor. So yeah, ethics is there. I don't know that the licensing requirements. So, and I'll give you an example. A lot of times to be a independent adjuster or a staff adjuster and to be licensed, you have zero test.
Yeah.
You have zero competency because the assumption is the carrier will train you, right? And so to get a license, you kind of just fill out your name, address, phone number, pay the $50, and there you go, off and running, right? On the public adjuster side, you often have to sit for a test. The CPCU designation, fortunately, kind of gives me a way to skip that line in a lot of states. But in a lot of states it doesn't. So I'm licensed in Hawaii. I had to go sit and take a 150 question test.
Me too.
Hawaii is actually super interesting though, right? Because you can actually represent claimants in a workers' comp matter because of there you have a legal desert, right? You can actually deal with cargo and intermodal stuff. You can get involved in pretty much anything that deals with it. You just can't walk into court and represent somebody
Right.
kind of the ceiling that I put on that Hawaii license. Other states are a lot more restrictive. Wisconsin, not that I would engage in the act of contracting, but Wisconsin, you can't be a public adjuster and a contractor. Illinois, you can,
I do
right? You
think
can
that
be both.
represents a kind of a conflict of interest, personally, me personally,
Mm.
because if I feel that you wouldn't be able to estimate and then fix it. Even though going back to your car example, your auto example, we see body shops do that all the time. And it's
Mhm.
particularly important with, or prevalent, I guess I should say, with the preferred vendor issue, which is a whole nother topic that Chantel doesn't want to get on right now because she has very strong opinions on it.
Yeah. The
Um,
real quick on the potential conflict. So I don't know if I see a conflict necessarily between a
okay.
public adjuster and a contractor, uh in the sense of from the policyholder perspective,
Mm,
right? If they're hiring somebody who's competent in both categories and they have to have two physical human beings and pay two different costs for that, um, I don't know that it removes anything because there's no requirement that a contractor be impartial. They are clearly partial to their interests, right? Of
sure.
getting a fair and reasonable price to perform the work. Um, uh, the UPA, right? The unlicensed practice of public adjusting. Contractors, I think, are overly guilty of that.
Mm,
The distinction when I speak to groups of contractors, the distinction I like to make is everyone in this room can tell me about a time when it worked, but none of you can tell me why. So, and policies are not commodities, right? The coverage changes, punctuation changes, and that changes everything, right? The meaning of a sentence.
oh my God.
And so when you think of what it takes to be a sophisticated policyholder advocate, right? Versus what it takes to be a contractor that can perform work. I'm not saying those skills can't be aligned, but there's deep waters in both categories,
Mhm.
Yep.
right? I think it's more of a unicorn than it is Johnny everybody. And when you start getting into all these roof endorsements, right? The scheduling of it, the ACV side of things, the limiting factors that come into policies. To Bill's point earlier about siding, and is there a matching endorsement that brings some coverage back if it's just a pure matching issue? Um, uh, there's just so many variables, and if I can, I think Bill Wilson, right?
Yes, yes,
Mhm.
yes,
Yep.
yes, yes.
Yeah, so love me some Bill Wilson. So
Oh,
RTFP, right? Read the full policy.
Yep.
The oftentimes people will say, "Well, David, is my loss covered?" Right? Is my loss covered? And I'm just like, I would need to read the policy to know.
Mm.
in the
Yeah.
immortal words of every coverage attorney everywhere, quote, it depends, end quote.
It depends, right? Right. And the one thing that I find really interesting in the wonderful world of coverage, ISO and the standardization, coverage bureaus, right? Not to just use one name, but I think there's at least two. But when you think of like what they went through to standardize policies to try to do this commoditization where carriers were then, kind of fighting on price, right? Then Geico came along and kind of ruined all of that, right? And now people change that. Like at the bottom of every policy that uses, some type of copyrighted form, change like this contains copyrighted material with the permission of,
Right,
right? Well, that
right.
means it was changed. Because if it was just the straight coverage form, it would just have the ISO or insert copyrighted person's material here. But they
Absolutely.
changed something, right?
My students absolutely hate me because I routinely pop up on their when we go into the second semester. I will start popping up because they need to start learning how to read the policy. Is
Mhm.
this a standardized policy? And it's AAIS,
Yeah,
American Association of Insurance Services, is that
yeah,
second one that
yeah,
you were thinking of.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
is this AAIN, AAIS? Is this ISO? Is this a manuscript policy which wrote all by themselves? Like they
yeah,
literally got a pen and wrote it out, manuscript, or is it a hybrid, which is what you're talking
yeah.
about, where
Yeah.
they say this material, quotes, blah, blah, blah. And I'm loving you talking about the punctuation because one of the articles that I have the students read in my RMI 110 class, the intro class, is what's called, it's an older article, I think from 2009, but it's an older article with the $10 million comma.
Oh
And,
yeah,
and I want to
the
say it's a
Oxford comic one.
Wisconsin claim.
Yeah.
I want to say it's a Wisconsin claim, but I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
I
Bill,
think
do
it,
you
I
know
think
about
it
this?
is.
Yes, I can't speak to it, but I've heard of it.
Okay, so basically, guys, if you don't know, it deals with a comma. That's what it deals with. Like there's one comma, and if this comma is placed in one area, it means one thing, and if it's not placed there, then it means something completely different. And that is how precise a policy can be. So when I say that insureds don't understand coverage, they don't, and when David says you need to be a professional to know how to read this, you do. And David, if I could quote you, I think what you were saying is when the contractors don't know why it doesn't work, it's because they just happen to like slip through and maybe no
Hmm.
one caught that comma. Who knows,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're right, David. I agree that I don't really see a conflict between, if a contractor is acting as a public adjuster and vice versa. I don't really see a conflict there. But you're right. I don't think you can be kind of the radial tire of, insured representation and be an effective uh, public adjuster. I know you don't like that term, but that's what I'm going to use.
It's
An
not that
effective.
I don't like it. It just carries that stigma, right?
I know. There's no
Um,
stigmas here, though.
yeah,
We're
yeah.
all
Well, and
friends.
I'm trying to be the change I want to see in the world. And I will say, if I can, being ingrained in this world now for a couple of years, I've found so many other like-minded people like me. It's really good. I think, there's more good coming into it. And the people that were, call it the loud, disruptive types, I think are slowly being pushed out as more and more pe good people come in. I see it in the professional trade associations. I see it at the conventions I go to. I see it at the speaking events. Um, it's heartwarming to see people taking an interest in and getting involved in these things. So sorry, Bill. Just
That's all right.
yeah,
Anyway, again, I just would say that if you're going to be the contractor making repairs to an insurance job, chances are you're not going to have all the background knowledge you need to properly represent the policyholder in the navigation of a complex coverage claim.
hmm
And vice versa. I think if you're, knee deep in coverage issues every day, you're not going to be the kind of company that's going to be able to run construction crews to effectively repair buildings.
right,
So, pick your path and do whatever it is you do the best as
yeah,
best you can.
yeah. Yeah, and that's what, at least at the losses that I tend to get involved in, think like your general adjuster, executive general, national general adjuster levels. Um, you know, we don't necessarily go out and pull out a clipboard and start laser measuring, right? Like you're engaging building consultants, you're engaging engineers, you're engaging industrial hygienists, there's levels of science and preciseness that need to be brought into this stuff. And that's the precision I try to bring into the word nerding of the policy,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
To really just try to understand what that process is, what the obligations of the parties are, and then just kind of move through it, right?
Sure.
So
I've
yeah,
I've worked with public adjusters who were roofing contractors, and that's all they did
yeah,
were roofs.
yeah, yeah,
You can probably pull that off, for
yeah,
the most part. I don't think there's much of a. Again, I don't feel like there's a conflict, but I also don't feel like there's a problem if you're just going to be doing residential roof replacements and you want to be a public adjuster as well.
right,
It's probably not necessary, but I mean, to
yeah,
each his own. But on the higher end, like you're describing, the larger losses, you're not going to be the guy actually measuring and doing the nuts and bolts. You're going to be overseeing that as more of a managerial position.
right.
And anyway, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. The right now I think with the whole unlicensed practice of public adjusting, so Texas had a famous case with a roofing company trying to say that it was a violation of their First Amendment rights. That got shot down. There's another one that's just kind of popping up. I forget the state. I think it might even be Kansas, if I'm not mistaken. Where that is now the next front where that argument is trying to be advanced. Illinois, something interesting, because at least as far as I know, they're the only state that allow a public adjuster to also be a contractor, vice versa. Um, if you are a public adjuster in Illinois and you even just recommend a contractor to use, not even be the contractor, you are giving a warranty to the workmanship of that contractor.
Mhm.
And yeah,
I'm
that
seeing
to me is
this.
scary. Like,
I see, and I think it's scary as well
yeah,
because, and I do not think carriers are recognizing this. There are trends now that I am seeing where there's a discount in premiums, and it's written into the policy. Like will take a discount in the premium as the insured if I go with your recommendation of a preferred vendor or whatever. And the carrier will guarantee the work. I think that is dangerous, but what do I know?
well,
I guess I'm kind of
can I give
old
you the
school.
let me give you the law of large numbers on that, right? So they do that with cars, right? Choose
Yes,
a direct repair
yes.
facility, get a repair, and we'll back it anywhere in the nation, workmanship, blah, blah, blah. Here's the law of large numbers on that. What's the average time somebody lives in a home?
Oh, probably 20, 30 years, isn't it?
No, no. Like if you, especially with everything that happened with the low interest rates,
Oh,
people move houses every 2, 3 years because of
are
the
you
capital
kidding me?
gain
No, oh,
structure.
God, I hate
Yeah.
moving.
Yeesh.
Yeah. I think it's literally under 5 years on a national average is the length of time
Wow.
somebody lives in a home. The that might change now because I've got one of those sexy 2% interest rates.
Yeah, see,
So
that's
I
me.
ain't going anywhere, right? I just retired here. No matter what, I will own this piece of land. Though I think that's it. And if it's a non-transferable warranty, once you get beyond it, there's no more exposure. It's extinguished, right? And not only that, but like those contractors, the carriers will have an endless line of contractors willing to swing a hammer, and there's not going to be a shortage of it. All like everything I see in the contractor world is how do I get into direct repair networks? How do I get on the referral list? Because it is difficult to market for home repair.
Hmm.
It is difficult to get a funnel of work. If you have one phone number that tens of thousands of people call every day to report damage to their homes, wouldn't you want to be at the other end of that referral source? Um, I think back though to all of the steering issues that happened in the 90s, right? And all the
Right.
litigation that kind of came out of that. I imagine that's going to be, the next round as different contractor associations try to challenge insurance carriers. But here's the one distinctive difference that I don't think was in an auto policy. And it's been a minute since I've done auto claims, but um uh if it's in the contract,
Yes.
right? If it's in the contract. And
I'm s-
so
I'm
yeah.
seeing it in the contract. Excuse
Yeah.
me. I'm seeing it in the contract, but then I'm also seeing the ability that the insured can go with the preferred contractor and then mid contract or whatever change their mind. I think with the steering issues, the problem that I have is that the carrier is picking one person. And it used to be that we would fight this tooth and nail where, because the insured is unsophisticated, may be unsophisticated, and not have a contractor. And if push come to shove, I would give three contractors and
Mhm.
let that person choose and
Yep.
say, give them the estimate that I've written, that Bill's written, that you've written, whatever. And that contractor should be able to do it. If not, contact me and
Mhm.
then I will get you, Bill, whoever out with the contractor again before they start work to get an agreed estimate, agreed price, agreed scope, whatever.
Right.
That's what
I've
I
I've
worry
long
about.
been I have long been against the preferred contractor route for carriers. When I was at the carrier side, we had a lot of contractors come in that wanted to become part of a network that we should create, and I couldn't justify it. I just having been in construction in the past and knowing what can go wrong during those processes, as an insurance company, you really don't want to be part of that. You don't want to have your name on it in any way. And you can look at it as, well, you're really not taking care of your policyholder if all you're doing is, you're paying for the damage, but you're not really repairing the damage. It's indemnity. That's what the contract is about. It's indemnifying you. It's not,
Yeah.
we can't step in and just take over your house and repair it for you.
Yeah.
I totally agree. However, Missouri does have this rule before this all got to be popular, where a Missouri court did state, and again, we're going back to our language of a policy, and I realize that we're getting ready to run out of time here, but the wording of our standardized policies say we, as the carrier, because it's in quotes, will repair or replace the damaged property. If you take that literally,
Yeah.
as the courts did in Missouri, the court said, hey, Mr. Insurer, Ms. Insurer, you need to go out to the insured's house and start swinging a hammer.
Yeah.
And
That
so
creates a lot of misery.
it does, but that's a
That
whole
was
other
a
topic. That is a
Chantal, that
whole
was a
nother
Bill pun right there.
Yeah.
You got to get some hot takes on some edits there. If he's got fire like that coming out, that's your hot takes.
you
Really on fire
know.
today.
Maybe you should be sick more often, Bill.
Right.
So, David, we are running out of time.
Yeah, no worries.
Where are you speaking next? How can people get in touch with you? You want to plug anything that you're doing?
I'm actually going to be attending the first party claim conference in Boston this December. My business partner, Dan Williams, will actually be speaking on builders risk insurance policies in that current market. That's up in Boston, I think the first week of December. Open to everybody. So there's no limitations on who can attend. You're probably familiar with Stephen Badger. He usually ends up taking the dais up there at some point. Bill Wilson, I actually saw, was on it as well, so he'll be putting on a seminar up there. And then the next thing that I'm going to just kind of attend for my own professional development, I love me some word nerding, so I'm going to go to the American Bar Association's Coverage Litigation Symposium. That's in Arizona every year. I think I want to say Sedona, but don't, or Tucson, excuse me, Tucson, Arizona, and that's in March. But otherwise, you can find my claim website, advocateclaimservice.com. You can find my risk management website, advocateriskmanagement.com. Yeah, it's just really great to be here. Really great to see you guys. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for being with us
Cool.
and explaining the other side. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
David, for coming along here. I guess we're going to wrap it up here, Chantal.
Absolutely. Yeah. We will see everybody in 2 weeks. I do not have what our topic is, so it'll probably be just
It's something amazing.
Of course it is. I mean, it's Bill and me. So
Yeah.
And
there
then
you go.
Star Wipe.
Yes. Don't tempt me because we're on YouTube and I will do it. We'll see y'all later. Bye.
Take care.
Bye, Bill. Pleasure seeing you guys.
Thanks for joining us on the Art of Adjusting podcast, where we talk about life as an insurance adjuster.
If you enjoyed this podcast or this episode, please give us 5 stars and a review. It does help the algorithm pick us up.
Hit that subscribe button real quick and tell all of your adjuster friends to check this out as well. For independent adjusting services, go to www.auten.claims. And for anyone interested in working as an independent liability adjuster, go to the Contact Us tab to join our roster. In the meantime, you can contact me at theartofadjusting.com for consulting and training purposes.